The first thing I heard wasn't my mother's voice, but the sound of a crystal glass tapping against porcelain, a sharp, delicate noise that sliced through the quiet luxury of the Silver Garden restaurant. When she finally spoke, her words were louder than the tap. "What are you doing here? Go eat outside! Beggar!" The sentence hit harder than any slap. Conversations around us stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered over plates. My sister Rachel froze for a heartbeat, then smirked, pretending to hide a laugh behind her champagne glass. My mother's voice carried that familiar tone, sweet on the surface, poisoned underneath. She never raised her voice to scream. She didn't need to. Her cruelty was surgical, precise, and always public. I felt every eye in that elegant room turn toward me. The dim light from the chandelier painted her pearls gold, while mine reflected nothing. The same way she had always wanted it. I stood there holding my coat like a shield. "Mom," I said softly, "you invited me." Her eyebrows arched perfectly, shaped perfectly, mocking. "I invited you to see how real people live, Emily. Not to embarrass yourself." Rachel giggled again, leaning toward her fiancé. She probably thought this was a buffet. My throat burned, but I didn't let it show. My mother had trained me well in one thing: how to hide pain. I looked at her, memorizing the scene, like a deposition, the folded napkin at her side, the gold ring glinting under candlelight, the waiter frozen near the table, unsure whom to obey. I had spent 10 years learning how to control my voice in courtrooms where men twice my age tried to talk over me. I knew how to win without shouting. I placed my bag on the empty chair beside the table, the one they had deliberately left out for me, and sat down. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Emily," my father finally murmured, his voice, a soft tremor. "Maybe it's better if you—" "Stay," I interrupted. My voice didn't tremble. "I'll stay." My mother's smile sharpened. "Suit yourself, but don't expect anyone to pay for your meal." She turned to the waiter. "Please bring the check for 4. She's not part of this dinner." The waiter hesitated, eyes darting between us. "Yes, ma'am." I could feel the judgmental air thickening, like the moment before a jury delivers a verdict. My heart thudded once hard, but my face remained unreadable. Inside, something ancient and familiar stirred a memory of every time she had made me small. The Christmas when she forgot to set a plate for me. The graduation dinner she skipped. The phone calls she answered with sighs. Tonight was supposed to be different. She had texted me 3 days ago. "Dinner at the Silver Garden. Family only. Rachel has news." I thought maybe, just maybe, she wanted to reconnect. Instead, she wanted witnesses. She always did her best performances before an audience. I looked at Rachel's diamond engagement ring flashing under the chandelier and realized this wasn't a dinner. It was theater. My humiliation was the entertainment. My hands tightened under the table nails, pressing into my palm. I imagined the feeling of holding a pen in a courtroom, the weight of proof in my hand. Not yet, I thought. Not here. Not until she finishes her show. My mother leaned back, satisfied, whispering something to the waiter, who nodded quickly. I caught the words, "Make sure she leaves soon." I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. The coldness steadied me. In that moment, something inside me shifted, not rage, not sorrow, but clarity. I realized this dinner wouldn't end with me walking out. It would end with her realizing who she had really invited. I smiled faintly and said, "Enjoy your meal, Mom. I'll wait for dessert." Her expression faltered for just a second, and that second was all I needed to know she had no idea what was coming. People always mistake calm for weakness. That's what my mother never understood. As I sat there, the chatter slowly returned around us, forced and awkward, like a symphony trying to resume after a wrong note. I could feel Rachel's eyes drilling into me, waiting for me to explode, to cry, to storm out. But I didn't move. I simply breathed one measured breath at a time, counting each second like a clock in a courtroom. My mind separated from the humiliation, detached and analytical. Every detail became evidence: the name tag on the waiter's vest, the table number etched into the brass plate, the phone lying beside Rachel's wine glass recording snippets of her laughter. Evidence. Always start with evidence. That's the rule I'd built my life around. My mother thought she was performing another of her social executions, but I had already begun writing the closing statement. "Emily," my father whispered, leaning toward me, "please don't make a scene." I turned my head slowly. "I'm not making a scene, Dad. I'm remembering one." He blinked, confused, then looked away. My mother had turned her focus to a couple seated nearby, apologizing for the disruption as if she were a victim of my presence. "We didn't know she would show up," she said sweetly. "She tends to appear uninvited." The couple offered polite smiles and pitying glances. My jaw tightened. I wanted to tell them that the woman they admired had once left me stranded on a highway after an argument when I was 16, that she used silence like a knife. But I said nothing. Instead, I picked up my phone and opened the screen pretending to check messages. The reflection on the glass showed her smirk perfectly. I took a quiet photo. One frame. Timestamp. Location. I typed a short message. "Proceed when ready." My fingers didn't tremble. The message was for someone outside the restaurant, a quiet ally who owed me a favor. "What are you doing?" Rachel asked, suspicion flickering in her tone. "Working," I said. "It's what I do best." She rolled her eyes. "Still pretending to be important, I see." I didn't respond. My mother's laughter floated back across the table light and poisonous. "Oh, Rachel, don't tease her. She's sensitive. She never quite adapted to our world." I sipped my water again and watched her reflection ripple on the surface, distorted, fragile, fading each time the liquid moved. That's how she lived, perfectly composed on the outside chaos underneath. I knew her rhythm now. She would humiliate, she would command, and she would win until someone broke the rhythm. So I broke it. "Mom," I said quietly. She looked up, annoyed. "Yes." "Would you like to order dessert now or after the toast?" I asked, voice steady. "Toast," she repeated. "You didn't think I'd come empty-handed, did you?" For the first time all evening, she hesitated. I smiled faintly, just enough for Rachel to notice. "You always said presentation matters," I continued. "Tonight I brought something worth showing." My voice didn't rise, but the air changed subtle, charged like static before lightning. My mother's eyes narrowed, uncertain whether I was bluffing or threatening. The truth was simpler. I was preparing. Calmly, patiently, like fire waiting for oxygen. I used to think my mother's house smelled like safety. Now I know it was control disguised as lavender. Every corner of the Lawson estate gleamed with perfection, white marble floors, framed diplomas, expensive silence. Growing up, I learned early that sound meant punishment and quiet meant survival. Rachel, my older sister, was the melody my mother adored. She had the golden hair, the practiced laugh, the charm that made people believe the Lawson family was flawless. I was the pause between notes tolerated and visible. When Rachel won pageants, I clapped from the audience. When I got a full scholarship to law school, my mother said, "That's cute, dear, but real success isn't about studying, it's about being seen." She didn't come to my graduation. She was at a charity gala instead, shaking hands with donors who thought she was the picture of maternal grace. I learned then that appearances were her religion, and I was her heretic. My father wasn't cruel, just absent in his own quiet way. He hid behind newspapers, golf clubs, and the illusion of peace. "Don't upset your mother," he'd whisper whenever she turned her sharp gaze on me. I grew up mistaking neutrality for love. By 16, I had started documenting everything: texts, receipts, emails. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. When she forgot to pay my college tuition one semester, claiming she must have misplaced the check, I took screenshots of the bank transfers she'd made to Rachel that same week. When she told family friends I was experimenting with bad life choices, I saved the voicemail. I didn't know why I kept them then. I just knew that someday truth would matter. My mother believed emotions were weaknesses. "Crying is for people without control," she'd say while powdering her face. I stopped crying at 10. Instead, I studied how she manipulated others. The pauses she used, the smiles she weaponized, the way she rewrote reality in real time until even my father believed her version. She could make you apologize for things she'd done. She could make cruelty sound like concern. I remember the day I moved out. She handed me a small envelope, her lips pursed. "This should help," she said, pretending generosity. Inside was $50 and a brochure for etiquette classes. "You'll need this more than rent money." That was the last time I cried. Years later, when I made my first courtroom win, I didn't call her. I didn't need her applause anymore. I had learned the one skill she never mastered: silence. The kind that terrifies people who thrive on control. She used to tell guests that Rachel was the reflection of her and I was the experiment. I guess she was right. Experiments eventually reveal truths people don't want to face. And now, years later, as I sat in the Silver Garden watching her sip wine while pretending I didn't exist, I realized she hadn't changed. But I had. She still believed she held all the power. She still thought humiliation was her favorite sport. She didn't realize she had trained me in precision, in observation, in patience. She taught me to survive her, and I had turned that survival into a skill set. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure. For 32 years, I had been the quiet shadow in her perfect frame. But even shadows can burn when they step into the light. I looked at her across the table, every movement rehearsed, every word polished for the audience she didn't know she had. My mother lived behind a mask, the kind that cracked not with anger, but with truth. And tonight I planned to break it not with shouting, but with facts. Because the one thing she feared more than shame was documentation, and I had years of it. 3 days before that dinner, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing a client contract. The name on the screen made my chest tighten, Mom. Her messages were always short, efficient, cold. But this one felt different. Dinner at the Silver Garden, family only. Rachel has news. For a few seconds, I stared at the text, reading it over and over like it might change if I blinked. Family only. Those words meant everything and nothing at once. After years of being excluded from birthdays, holidays, and even funerals, I thought maybe this was a truce. A fragile olive branch from a woman who had spent her life pruning anything that resembled love. I typed back carefully. "I'd love to come. Thank you for including me." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. That was her style: drop a command, disappear, then wait for obedience. I spent that Saturday preparing like someone going to court rather than dinner. My navy dress hung neatly on the door, modest, elegant, not designed to compete. I tied my hair back, minimal makeup, simple gold earrings, the ones my grandmother gave me before she died, whispering, "Wear these when you want to remember, you come from better women." My reflection looked calm, but the part of me that was still a daughter hoped for warmth. Maybe Rachel's engagement was a reason to rebuild. Maybe my mother had softened. Maybe forgiveness was possible. I should have known better. The Silver Garden wasn't a random choice. It was her stage, her territory. A restaurant where the rich were recognized and the invisible stayed outside. A place she and her friends occupied weekly like a kingdom with reserved thrones. I realized later that she didn't invite me to reconnect. She invited me to witness, to be part of the set decoration for her perfect family tableau. That night I arrived 10 minutes early. I saw her through the glass wall, seated elegantly, champagne already poured. Rachel was glowing under the chandelier, her fiancé beside her, expensive smiles all around. My father was there too, smaller somehow, fading behind their brightness. I waited outside a moment longer, adjusting my breath. When I entered, my mother's gaze found me instantly. There was no joy in it, only assessment. "Oh," she said, like discovering a stain on the tablecloth. "You came." Rachel waved lazily. "Emily, you're early. How ambitious of you." My mother's voice was soft but lethal. "We weren't sure you'd show up, dear. We didn't want you to feel out of place." Out of place. 2 words she'd repeated all my life. Too quiet for crowds, too serious for parties, too emotional for family. Too much, and never enough. The waiter approached and asked table for 5. My mother corrected him immediately. 4. She didn't look at me when she said it. The waiter blinked, confused. I smiled politely and whispered, 5. He hesitated before nodding. My mother's jaw tightened. That was her first mistake of the evening, assuming I'd still play by her script. The dinner began with laughter, the kind that hurt your teeth to hear. Rachel flashed her engagement ring. My mother performed joy flawlessly. Every toast, every compliment, every detail was rehearsed perfection. I sat quietly the shadow again, but this time I was watching, documenting, learning her rhythm, when she finally turned to me and asked, "So, Emily, are you still working those small cases?" I met her gaze and smiled. "Yes," I said softly, "but this one will be my biggest yet." She didn't know I meant her. The table gleamed under the soft golden light polished to mirror perfection, but all I could see reflected was the outline of people pretending to love each other. Rachel's fiancé Daniel leaned over to show my mother photos of their upcoming house in Beverly Hills. My mother's eyes glowed with pride, the kind that only existed when someone else's success could be displayed like jewelry. "You've done so well, darling," she said, her voice syrupy. Then she glanced at me, her tone turning crisp. "And you, Emily, still living downtown in that apartment." She said the word apartment as if it were a disease. Rachel giggled. "Mom, be nice. Emily likes her minimalist lifestyle." She looked at me smirking. "That's what you call small spaces now, right?" The waiter appeared, but there was no chair for me. I stood beside the table, my hand resting lightly on the back of an empty seat, as though I hadn't noticed. "Excuse me," I asked politely. "Is there a chair missing?" My mother tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh dear, they must have made a mistake. But it's fine. You don't need to trouble them." Rachel raised her glass. "You can sit at the bar, Emily. It'll be just like old times. Remember when you used to waitress during college? The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it sliced cleanly. I felt the heat climb my neck, the instinctive flush of humiliation, but I forced my breath steady. I had spent too many years letting her dictate the terms of my worth. Not tonight. "It's all right," I said quietly. "Standing gives a better view." My mother's eyes narrowed, suspecting a hidden meaning but unwilling to reveal that she didn't understand. A better view of what she asked. Of everything that's about to happen. The words hung in the air like smoke-thin, invisible, but dangerous if you breathed too long. My father tried to intervene, his voice small. "Let's just eat." He looked tired, older than I remembered. The waiter returned with another chair, hesitant, unsure of the family dynamics he'd stumbled into. I thanked him softly and sat down, smoothing the napkin over my lap with deliberate calm. My mother resumed her performance, speaking loudly to the waiter about our family tradition of fine dining, making sure everyone heard her surname. The way she said Lawson was like a title. Rachel chimed in. "Mom, should we tell her the big news now?" "Oh, yes," my mother purred. "Rachel's getting married in Paris next spring. The guest list is very exclusive." She paused, savoring the pause like a violinist holding a note. "But we'll find a small seat for you, Emily. Near the back, of course." Daniel laughed politely, unaware that he was laughing at the wrong person. I smiled back. "Don't worry, I prefer front row seats." My mother's fork paused mid-air. "Front row," she repeated, eyes narrowing. "For what?" "For when people finally see who everyone really is." The air stilled. Rachel rolled her eyes, mistaking my calm for another failure to fight back. "God, Emily, you're so dramatic. This is why no one invites you anywhere." My mother chuckled, relief returning. "Let's not ruin the night, dear. She's always been sensitive. That's what happens when one doesn't marry well." The guests at nearby tables exchanged glances. The performance was becoming too loud, too cruel to ignore. Even the music seemed to hush. The humiliation was public now, exactly how my mother liked it. She believed control was best demonstrated through spectacle. I picked up my glass and studied the wine swirling inside, its deep color reflecting candlelight like spilled secrets. Then I set it down with precision. "Mom," I said softly, "I'm curious about something. Do you ever worry about how your actions might look outside this table?" "Excuse me, public image," I said evenly. "Reputation. The kind of thing people care about when they sit on charity boards and sign donor agreements." Her smile faltered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," I said almost kindly. "Just professional curiosity." Rachel groaned. "Oh, God, here we go again. Are you going to lecture us about ethics now?" Not tonight. I leaned forward slightly. Tonight's about family. My mother didn't like uncertainty. Her whole life was built on control. And the one thing control can't tolerate is not knowing what happens next. She forced a laugh, high and brittle. You always did have a strange sense of humor, Emily. I met her gaze directly. It's not humor, Mom. It's habit. I like to plan for consequences. That landed. I saw it in her pupils, that tiny flicker of fear, the dawning realization that this might not be another harmless power play. The table fell silent again, waiting for her next move. I gave her a smile so small it was almost invisible. Don't worry, I said, finishing my drink. You'll understand soon. The moment stretched uncomfortable and electric. She looked around at the restaurant, expecting her loyal audience to validate her authority. But this time, the crowd wasn't on her side. They were watching her, not me. The stage she had built for humiliation was slowly becoming mine. The sound of silverware clinking returned, forced and metallic, as if everyone were pretending that the tension hadn't just changed shape. My mother tried to reclaim her composure, crossing one leg over the other with calculated grace. Emily, she said, her tone sweet and toxic. I know you've always had feelings, but this isn't the time for one of your little speeches. Rachel giggled, swirling her wine. Let's just let her talk, Mom. Maybe she's writing another one of her essays on trauma. They laughed together, the synchronized cruelty of people who believed they were untouchable. I stayed still. Stillness had always been my armor. When they mocked me, I used to shrink. Now I let silence stretch until it became their mirror. I watched my mother's reflection in her glass, the faint tremor of her hand. She was nervous, though she'd never admit it. Control was her addiction, and I was her relapse. Mom, I said quietly, why did you invite me tonight? To celebrate, she replied too quickly. Your sister's engagement. What else? That's strange, I said, because I called the restaurant earlier today. The reservation was made for 4 people, not 5. Rachel frowned. What are you implying, that I wasn't part of the plan? My mother's lips tightened. You're being paranoid again. Paranoid, her favorite word to invalidate truth. I could feel the blood pulsing in my ears, but my tone remained calm. No, I'm just observant. It's a habit you taught me, watching what people say versus what they do. Emily, my father murmured, trying to calm me, please, let's not. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the woman who had spent her life rewriting reality. Do you remember the night you told Aunt Margaret I'd stolen from you? I asked. The bracelet, the one you found the next day. She blinked once slowly. That was years ago. Yes, I said. And you never apologized. Her voice sharpened. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said, my voice cutting through the table's tension like glass. I'm reminding you that lies have a memory. They wait. The table fell silent. Even Rachel looked uneasy now. Emily, my mother whispered, if this is about money, you could have just asked. You don't have to make a scene. I laughed softly. Oh, it's not about money, Mom. It's about truth. And truth doesn't need a loan. Her composure cracked. It was subtle, but I saw it, the twitch at the corner of her mouth, the glint of sweat under perfect makeup. You've always loved drama, she muttered. You get that from your father. No, I said, I get survival from him. The rest I learned from you. Rachel slammed her glass down. Enough. Can't you see what you're doing to Mom? You ruin every event, every family gathering because you can't let go of your victim act. Her words echoed through the restaurant louder than she intended. Several diners looked over. My mother glanced around, mortified. That's what she hated most, eyes on her when the script failed. Rachel, I said softly, how much did Mom give you for the down payment on your house? Her face went white. What? The transfer. The one that came from the foundation account money meant for donations. Emily, my mother snapped, you don't know what you're talking about. I do. I reviewed the foundation's public filings. It's amazing what's accessible when you know how to look. My mother's breath caught. You had no right. I had every right, I said evenly. It's under my name, too. You used my name when you registered it, remember? The one you forged so you could avoid taxes. For the first time that evening, her confidence faltered completely. The diners were whispering now, curiosity spreading like wildfire. "Mom," I said gently, almost kindly, "you invited me here to humiliate me, but all you've done is build the perfect audience." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look superior. She looked afraid. "Dinner's just getting started," I said. "Let's tell them the rest." My mother tried to recover, straightening her posture and forcing a smile that no longer fit her face. "Emily, you're clearly confused," she said, her tone brittle. "Whatever nonsense you've been reading online, it's slander." But her voice trembled just enough for the nearby tables to notice. Rachel turned toward, her eyes wide. "Mom, what is she talking about?" "Nothing," she snapped. "Your sister's always been dramatic." The transfers, Mom." I interrupted, keeping my tone calm but unrelenting. 2 payments of $50,000 each from the Lawson Family Foundation to an unlisted account. Rachel's down payment came 3 days later. The color drained from Rachel's face. "That's not—" "Don't," I warned softly. "I have the documentation." My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass, the thin stem trembling. "You're unbelievable," she hissed. "You'd destroy your own family for what attention?" "For accountability," I said. "You always said I wasn't strong enough to face the world. Consider this proof you were wrong." The waiter hesitated nearby, pretending to adjust the flowers. He wasn't the only one listening. The entire restaurant had gone quieter than candlelight. My father finally spoke, voice breaking. "Is this true?" "Margaret." She didn't answer him. She couldn't. For the first time in her life, words abandoned her. She had built her empire on appearances, and I had just cracked its foundation in front of an audience. Rachel looked between us, horrified. "You don't understand, Emily. Mom was just helping. It's family money." "Charity money," I corrected. "Funds meant for community programs. Misappropriation, technically, and in California that's called embezzlement." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. My mother's mask broke. "You think you're so righteous?" she said, leaning forward. "You think this little stunt makes you powerful?" "No," I said evenly. "It makes me free." Her eyes burned with something primal. "You wouldn't dare go public." I smiled faintly. "Mom, you raised me to be precise. Do you really think I'd come unprepared?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a slim folder, thin, neat labeled. Her gaze followed every movement, realization dawning with horror. "I already filed a preliminary report with the board of directors, and the state attorney's office will receive the full documentation by morning." Rachel gasped. "You— what?" "I told you I said eyes never leaving my mother's. This isn't revenge, it's justice." My mother's face crumpled for the first time. Not in regret, she didn't have that capacity, but in disbelief that she had lost control. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You'd do this to your own mother." "You did this to yourself," I said softly. "You taught me to value image over truth, to hide pain behind etiquette, to survive through silence. But you forgot one thing. Silence keeps the abuser safe, not the victim." Rachel started crying quietly at first. My father sat motionless, his eyes wet and distant, like a man realizing too late what he'd allowed. "I didn't know," he murmured. I looked at him, my voice softer. "I know you didn't. That's how she operates. Denial is her favorite weapon." The restaurant manager appeared clearly uneasy. "Is everything all right, Ms. Lawson?" My mother flinched at the sound of her name in question form. She looked around the room and saw what I wanted her to see, the audience she used to crave, now watching her unravel. I stood, my tone measured and final. "You once told me the world doesn't forgive weakness. You were right, but it also doesn't forgive corruption." I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "And when the news breaks, remember this moment, the night you mistook your daughter's silence for submission." Then louder, I addressed the manager. "Please add the bill to my tab. I'll cover it. Family should never owe debts they can't pay." I turned to leave, the soft hum of whispers following like the echo of justice finally arriving. Behind me, the woman who had controlled every narrative of her life sat speechless, surrounded by witnesses. The story she once wrote had just been rewritten by the daughter she tried to erase. The following morning, Los Angeles woke to headlines that tasted like Justice Lawson Family Foundation under investigation for fraud. The article quoted anonymous sources, but I knew exactly who they were: whistleblowers I'd helped file statements with months earlier. I hadn't expected it to go public so soon, but fate doesn't wait for permission. By noon, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Rachel called 7 times, my father once, my mother never. When I finally opened the news, there was her photo on the homepage, perfectly styled, perfectly destroyed. The same woman who once told me public images everything now had hers reduced to a headline she couldn't edit. The board had frozen all accounts pending audit. Her charity friends, the ones who clinked glasses and whispered admiration, were suddenly silent. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt the strange stillness of release. That evening, rain brushed against my apartment windows, soft and rhythmic. I sat on the couch with my laptop open, rereading the email I'd drafted for weeks, the official statement to the board. Every word was careful, calm, professional. No vengeance, no drama, just truth. Transparency and accountability must be applied equally, even within our own families. When I hit send, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like exhaling after years underwater. By nightfall, Rachel showed up at my door. Her mascara was smudged, her voice shaking. "How could you do this to her?" she demanded. "She's our mother." I looked at her carefully. "No, Rachel. She's a woman who used our mother's title as armor. You just never noticed the difference." She folded her arms, defiant but uncertain. "She'll never forgive you." I smiled faintly. "That's the point." We stood in silence until she finally whispered, "You destroyed her." I shook my head. I revealed her. "There's a difference." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "They might prosecute Emily. It could go to court." "Then it'll be a fair trial," I said, "for once." After she left, I sat in the quiet, remembering every moment my mother had said I was weak, dramatic, ungrateful. I thought about the nights she'd call me nothing for choosing law instead of marriage, the dinners where she'd toast Rachel for her beauty and ignore my achievements. She used to say, "Control is a kind of love," but I finally understood it was never love. It was fear disguised as authority. The next morning, I received a letter delivered by courier. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, slanted, disciplined. "Emily," it began, "you have no idea what you've done. Families protect each other no matter what. You've turned on your blood. I will never forget this." I smiled quietly, folding the letter back into the envelope. She was right, I had turned on my blood, because sometimes blood is the only thing keeping the poison alive. I opened my window and let the rain-soaked air fill the room. The city below moved on, indifferent, unburdened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing her approval or fearing her anger. The power she held over me had expired the moment truth became louder than her lies. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You're free." Within a week, the Lawson scandal was everywhere, from local broadcasts to national morning shows. Prominent philanthropist under investigation for financial misconduct. The headline repeated itself across every screen like a ghost my mother couldn't bury. The public adored the fall of the untouchable. Commentators dissected her interviews, her polished smiles, her old speeches about integrity and generosity. The irony was delicious to them, but painful to me, because I knew that every flawless image she'd built had been constructed out of the pieces of my silence. By day 3, her friends had vanished. Donors withdrew support. The board forced her to resign, and the foundation's offices were sealed for audit. Rachel texted again. "You need to fix this. You've gone too far." I didn't reply. She still thought this was about revenge. She didn't understand that the moment you expose truth, there's no too far. There's only honesty. Reporters waited outside my building. I avoided them, letting the facts speak for themselves. The official reports were enough falsified records, fraudulent transfers, a pattern of financial manipulation spanning 7 years. She'd funneled money through shell accounts, naming them after family members to avoid detection. I hadn't needed to exaggerate a single thing. My mother had built her own noose. I'd simply handed her the rope. Still, a part of me grieved. Not for her, but for the version of myself that had once begged for her approval. Late at night, I'd find myself scrolling through old photos, birthdays, graduations, those forced family portraits where her hand rested on my shoulder like a claim of ownership. I could see it now, the micro expression in her smile, the subtle distance in her eyes. Even in memory, she was calculating. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Rachel. It was Mr. Lopez, the Foundation's legal counsel. "Ms. Lawson," he said cautiously, "your mother has named you in her public statement." I laughed under my breath. "Of course she has." "What's the story this time that you fabricated the documents?" he said. "That you stole internal data and edited it to appear incriminating." Classic Margaret Lawson. Even cornered, she chose deflection over repentance. I could almost admire her persistence if it hadn't been so predictable. "Tell her," I said evenly, "that I recorded every call with the accountants, including hers. I also have the time-stamped access logs. If she wants to go public, I'll let her." He hesitated. "You realize this could destroy her completely." "It already did," I said. "I'm just filing the paperwork." That night, I drafted another letter not to her, but to the Foundation Board and the Department of Justice, clarifying the scope of her actions and the evidence trail. No emotion, no commentary. Just facts. Cold, clear, irrefutable. Truth had become my language now. By morning, I was trending online, the daughter who exposed her own mother. Half the country called me brave. The other half called me heartless. But morality, I'd learned, wasn't a popularity contest. Justice doesn't need applause. It only needs witnesses. When Rachel finally called again, her voice cracked between anger and desperation. "Do you hate us that much?" she cried. "You could have just talked to her privately." "I did," I said quietly. "For 30 years. She said nothing. There was no defense left. That night, I received a brief message from an unknown number. Just 4 words. "You've won." "Are you happy?" I didn't reply, but I stared at it for a long time. Happiness wasn't the goal. Peace was. And peace rarely feels like victory. It feels like standing in the wreckage of a war you refused to keep fighting and realizing the air is finally clean. 2 weeks later, the case became official. The state of California v. Margaret Lawson. I read the headline in the courthouse bulletin and felt an ache that was equal parts closure and sorrow. My mother once told me that appearances could win any battle. She had never met a courtroom stripped of charm. The morning of the hearing, the air outside the downtown courthouse was brisk and gray. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras aimed like weapons. When her car arrived, she stepped out in a beige suit and dark glasses, pretending indifference. She waved as if she were still at a charity gala, but her hands shook slightly. Her lawyer, a man named Vincent Cole, whispered something and she nodded tightly. The old performance instinct still alive, still desperate to hold control. I stood at a distance. I wasn't called to testify that day, but I wanted to see it. To see what truth looked like under fluorescent light and legal procedure. I sat at the back, quiet, unnoticed, my hair tied back, a plain notebook in hand. The courtroom was sterile, no chandeliers, no marble, no flattery. Just the law, cold and unblinking. When she took the stand, her voice carried that same polished rhythm she'd mastered all her life. "My daughter is mistaken," she said with calm authority. "She's had emotional struggles. She misinterpreted accounting documents she didn't understand." The prosecution smiled faintly as if expecting this. And yet, the attorney said, flipping through the files, the same accounting documents were verified by 3 independent auditors, all confirming the irregularities. "Would you like to see their signatures?" For a moment, she hesitated. Just 1 second, but enough. The camera flashes caught it. The public saw it. The illusion cracked. The prosecutor continued, voice level but firm. "Ms. Lawson, did you authorize any transfers from the Foundation's general fund to the private account registered under your daughter's name?" "Of course not," she said. "That would be absurd." "Then how do you explain this authorization slip?" He handed her a copy. Her signature glared from the paper. Perfect, deliberate, undeniable. Her lawyer tried to interject, claiming forgery, confusion, administrative error, but the evidence spoke louder. The dates matched the amounts, matched the digital logs, matched. The web of deceit she'd woven so carefully had become her own trap. When the judge asked if she had anything to add, she lifted her chin and said, "I was only trying to help my family." The courtroom murmured. The prosecutor nodded politely. by diverting charitable funds into personal accounts. She faltered. I made temporary adjustments. It was meant to be returned. After how long when the time was right? And who decides when that is? The silence that followed was absolute. Watching her unravel wasn't triumphant. It was surreal. This woman who'd once seemed invincible reduced to semantics and excuses. The same lips that once dictated my worth were now defending fraud with trembling logic. Outside, the media swarmed and headlines twisted. Socialite mother accuses daughter of betrayal, philanthropy, or fraud. Public sympathy swung wildly. Some saw me as the dutiful whistleblower, others as the ungrateful child, but none of it mattered. The law didn't care about sentiment. That night, I received an email from the state attorney. Thank you for your cooperation. Your documentation was instrumental in confirming the case's validity. I read it twice before closing my laptop. I should have felt proud. Instead, I just felt tired, like I'd spent years holding my breath and didn't yet know how to exhale. A week later, her assets were frozen. Rachel's accounts too pending review. Their house, the one with the white pillars and the lavender garden, was listed for repossession. I drove past it once just to see. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of my mother's old piano covered in dust, the sheet music still open to Ave Maria. For a second, I remembered being 12 watching her play that song at Christmas the way she smiled only when others were watching. That smile was gone now. Justice had come slow, methodical quiet. Not with applause, but with paperwork. I stood on the sidewalk, the wind cool against my skin, and whispered to no one. This is what truth costs. And for the first time, I accepted the price. The night before sentencing, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice that answered was weaker than I remembered, but unmistakable. Emily, my mother said I need to see you. I didn't reply at first. Silence stretched the same kind she used to weaponize. Please, she whispered. Just one meeting. Against every instinct, I agreed. Some part of me needed to see if she was capable of remorse or just manipulation dressed in desperation. We met at her lawyer's office, sterile and dimly lit. She sat at the end of a long oak table, dressed impeccably as always, but thinner, smaller. The power was gone. Only habit remained. You've ruined everything, she began. My name, my reputation, our family. I took my seat across from her. No, Mom. I just stopped helping you hide the ruins. Her eyes hardened. You think this is justice? Watching your own mother dragged through court like a criminal? I folded my hands. She is a criminal. I'm just the witness who finally spoke. Her voice rose trembling with rage. You ungrateful girl. Everything I built was for you. I laughed softly. You built it for your reflection, not your children. She flinched at that. It wasn't loud or cruel, but true. You never wanted a daughter, I continued. You wanted a legacy you could control. But you can't own people, Mom. Not even with money. She turned away, her fingers tightening on her designer clutch. You think I don't know what you've done to me? People look at me like I'm a monster. You taught them how, I said quietly. You taught everyone who you were. I just held up the mirror. For the first time, her voice cracked. Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything? I met her gaze steadily. Yes. I lost a mother a long time ago. That broke something in her. Her mask slipped, and for just a moment, I saw the woman beneath the one who'd once brushed my hair before school, humming softly before control devoured her. She took a shaky breath. I didn't mean to hurt you. You just wanted to own me, I said. You confuse love with possession. She looked older suddenly, her posture collapsing. They're saying I might go to prison. You might, I said simply. That's what happens when you break the law. You'll let them, it's not my choice anymore. You taught me that choices have consequences. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me. I'd spent years crying alone while she practiced her smile in the mirror. You'll regret this, she said finally. Someday you'll understand what it means to be a mother. Maybe, I said softly. But if I ever have a child, I'll make sure they never have to fear my approval. Her tears fell silently. You really hate me, don't you? I shook my head. I don't hate you. I understand you. That's worse. I stood to leave, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "What's this?" she asked. "The last thing you'll ever get from me," I said. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a notarized affidavit stating that I would not testify further or seek restitution. "This doesn't absolve you," I told her. "It just ends the story between us." She stared at it bewildered. "Why?" "Because justice isn't revenge," I said, "and I refuse to become you." As I walked out, her voice followed fragile and human for once. "Emily, what happens to me now?" I stopped at the door. "That depends on whether you learn what love without power feels like." The hallway outside was cold and empty. I could still hear her crying, but I didn't go back. For 30 years, she'd built a world where her comfort came before everyone else's truth. Tonight, that world ended. The next morning, she pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge cited her cooperation, her age, and her previous good standing. She'd served 2 years in minimum security. When the sentence was read, I felt no victory, just peace, that strange, heavy peace that follows a storm. My mother would spend the next years behind walls she couldn't decorate, watched by people she couldn't manipulate. And me, I'd finally walk outside without feeling like I owed anyone my silence. Justice wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, deliberate, permanent, like the sound of a door closing behind you, not from escape, but from release. The courtroom was nearly empty the day of the sentencing. Reporters had moved on to fresher scandals, and only a few curious strangers filled the benches. The judge entered her black robe flowing with the weight of consequence. My mother sat at the defense table, her posture still perfect, her pearl earrings gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights, her last act of vanity in a room built for truth. The prosecutor summarized the evidence one final time: the diverted funds, the forged signatures, the board resignations. My mother's lawyer spoke of her age, her contributions, her deep remorse. But there was no remorse. Not really. Just fear that her legacy would outlive her crimes. When it was my turn to speak as a witness, I stood. My voice was calm, but the air around me felt heavy with the ghosts of every dinner, every insult, every quiet humiliation. "Your Honor," I began, "this case is not only about money. It's about manipulation." My mother believed her reputation was more important than the truth. I spent most of my life thinking that silence was loyalty. It's not. It's complicity, and it destroys people from the inside out. The judge watched me carefully. "Do you wish for leniency, Ms. Lawson?" It was the first time anyone had asked me what I wanted in a courtroom full of demands. "No," I said softly. "I wish for clarity. Let the sentence reflect reality, not illusion." When the gavel finally struck, the sound was small but final. 2 years in federal prison, 3 years probation, full restitution. The clerk read it aloud, but my mother's face barely moved. Only her eyes flickered not at the loss of freedom, but at the loss of image. As the bailiff led her away, she turned once, her gaze meeting mine. For a split second, there was no rage, no calculation, just exhaustion. The look of someone who'd built her own cage and realized too late that the bars were self-made. Afterward, the judge approached me quietly. "You did the right thing," she said, "but the right thing often feels like the loneliest." I nodded because she was right. When I stepped outside, the air hit cold and sharp, the world too bright after months of shadow. Reporters shouted my name, asking if I felt vindicated. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Vindication wasn't the point, integrity was. And integrity doesn't trend. That night, I went home and opened the window of my apartment, letting the city hum wash over me. Somewhere across town, my mother sat in a holding cell. Rachel hadn't spoken to me since the verdict. My father had sent one message: "I'm sorry I wasn't braver." I didn't respond, but I forgave him silently. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter. I felt like my own person, flawed, scarred, but unowned. Justice hadn't given me joy, but it had given me something far rarer: quiet. In that quiet, I finally exhaled. Not because I won, but because I survived. And sometimes that's enough. The months after sentencing felt strangely still, like standing in the echo of a life that had collapsed, but hadn't yet stopped echoing. My days were quiet now. I worked from home, took long walks, and tried to learn what peace felt like when it wasn't followed by guilt. But freedom, I discovered, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly beside you, waiting for you to stop apologizing for it. Sometimes I'd see her name on the news, a brief update, a photograph of her in a beige prison uniform, her hair grayer, her eyes tired. The reporters called her the fallen matriarch. I didn't read the articles. I didn't need to. I knew that the woman they described, the manipulator, the perfectionist, the fraud, wasn't the mother I wanted, but she was the one I'd always had. Rachel stopped calling after the sentencing. She sent one letter instead, a bitter one. "You've destroyed what was left of us. I hope you're happy." I didn't respond, because the truth was, I wasn't happy, but I was whole. And sometimes wholeness costs more than happiness. In quieter moments, I caught myself remembering the smaller things, the way my mother's perfume lingered in every room, the sharp click of her heels down the marble hallway, the way her voice softened when she performed affection for strangers. I used to mistake that for love. Now I saw it for what it was, a strategy. My mother never loved people. She managed them. Even her kindness came with conditions. But memory is tricky. It softens even the sharpest edges. On some nights when the city lights reflected through my window, I'd wonder what she was thinking in her cell. If she missed the world she built, or if she finally saw how hollow it was. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted understanding, not for her, but for me. Therapy helped. My therapist asked once, "Do you think she ever loved you in her own way?" I thought about that for a long time. Maybe, I said finally, but her love was like currency. It had to be earned, displayed, and spent carefully. And when I stopped paying for it, she called it betrayal. I started volunteering at a legal clinic that helped women escape coercive families and financial abuse. The first client I met was a mother of two, trembling as she told me how her husband had hidden their bank accounts. "He says I'd be nothing without him," she whispered. I smiled gently. That's what they all say before they fall. Every time I helped someone like her, I felt a small piece of myself rebuild, not the daughter I had been, but the woman I was becoming. My mother taught me control. The world taught me pain, but justice taught me balance. 6 months into her sentence, I received a letter from the correctional facility. I almost threw it away, but curiosity won. Inside, the handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Emily, I've had a lot of time to think. I don't expect forgiveness. But I understand now why you did it. Maybe I taught you to fight too well. I hope someday you use that strength for something better than surviving me." I read it twice. For the first time, there were no accusations between her lines. Just resignation, maybe even truth. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter. Not as a token of reconciliation, but as evidence that even the cruel can recognize consequence. Justice had taken her freedom, but it had given me something far greater, the right to exist without her permission. And that, finally, was enough. A year after the verdict, Los Angeles bloomed again. The city had a way of forgetting its scandals, painting over shame with sunlight and noise. I'd moved to a smaller apartment near the coast, a place filled with plants and books instead of marble and mirrors. Every morning I made coffee, opened my window to the sound of gulls, and reminded myself that simplicity wasn't failure, it was freedom. I started teaching part-time at a community legal center, mentoring young women who wanted to study law but didn't have the resources. Most of them came from families like mine, people who used guilt as currency and silence as control. One of my students, Maya, once asked, "How do you keep from hating them?" I told her the truth. You don't. You outgrow the need for their approval. That's harder, but it lasts longer. The foundation my mother once owned had been restructured under new leadership. They reached out to me to consult on transparency practices. I accepted not out of nostalgia, but duty. Fixing what she had broken felt like the only way to truly close the circle. The office smelled different now, paper, coffee, clean air instead of perfume and pretense. I signed every document in my full name, Emily Margaret Lawson. For years, I'd avoided that middle name. Now, I used it deliberately. It was no longer hers. It was mine. Sometimes I'd visit the facility where she served her sentence. I never went inside. I'd park across the street watching women in gray uniforms move through the yard like ghosts learning how to breathe. I didn't go to punish her. I went to remind myself that power without empathy always ends the same way, isolated, surrounded by walls you built yourself. Rachel eventually called again months later. Her voice was softer, broken. "Mom's getting out soon," she said. "She's different." I didn't answer immediately. "Different how?" Quieter, she said. "She talks about you, about what she did." There was a pause. "She wants to see you." The words landed somewhere between wound and closure. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, maybe. That night, I opened her last letter again. The one where she admitted she'd taught me to fight too well. I read it slowly, trying to imagine her writing it alone, stripped of the audience she'd always performed for. Maybe the walls had forced her to listen to the echoes of her own lies. Maybe she had finally met herself. At sunset, I drove to the coast. The ocean was calm, the horizon washed in gold and gray. I stood barefoot in the sand, feeling the tide tug gently at my ankles. The same woman who once flinched at her mother's voice now stood unafraid before an endless sea. Justice had given me boundaries. Time had given me perspective. And forgiveness, the real kind, the quiet kind, was beginning to bloom where resentment used to live. I whispered into the wind, not sure if I was speaking to her or myself. "We're free now." The waves didn't answer, but I didn't need them to. The truth was enough. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the water, steady, calm, whole. For the first time, I didn't see her shadow in it. I saw mine. And it wasn't something to escape anymore. It was something to honor. Freedom, I realized, isn't the absence of pain. It's the ability to stand in it without losing who you are. And on that quiet beach, I finally stood tall. 2 years later, she was released. It wasn't in the news this time. No cameras, no headlines, no glossy pity features. Just a quiet entry in the court log: Margaret Lawson. Sentence completed, probation commenced. I found out from Rachel, who called one evening while I was grading papers at my kitchen table. "She's home," she said softly. "If you still call it that. Home." The word sat bitter on my tongue. That house had never been a home. It had been a museum of image and control. But curiosity, that old wound disguised as courage, wouldn't let me rest. So a week later, I drove there. The Lawson estate was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown. The lavender gardens were overgrown, the marble steps chipped. For a moment, I thought about turning back. But then I saw her. She was sitting on the porch in a simple gray sweater. No makeup, no jewelry, no armor. When she looked up, there was no flash of authority in her eyes, just a kind of quiet recognition. "Emily," she said, her voice trembled. "You came. I wanted to see it," I replied. "What's left?" She nodded. "Not much." We sat in silence for a long time. The wind moved through the hollow corridors behind us, carrying the faint scent of dust and old perfume. Finally, she spoke. "I've been going to therapy. Court requirement. But it's helped. I think I understand things now." I studied her face, the sharpness still there, but dulled by time. "Understand what?" "That I built my life around being admired instead of being loved," she said quietly. "And when admiration disappeared, I had nothing left." "That's what you taught me too," I said. "Only I decided not to repeat it." She gave a sad smile. "You always were stronger than me." "No," I said softly. "I just learned earlier that love isn't control." She looked at her hands, thin, pale, shaking slightly. "I lost everything." "You still have a chance to mean something," I said. "Not to rebuild your reputation, but to rebuild yourself." For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It sounded awkward, almost fragile. But for the first time, it was real. I didn't forgive her out loud. Some things aren't meant to be spoken. They're meant to be lived differently. We talked until the light began to fade. She told me she volunteered now, helping other women at the facility learn to read and write. "I thought I was teaching them," she said, "but they were teaching me." There was something human in her again, raw, uncertain, but human. When I finally stood to leave, she reached for my hand. "Will you visit again?" "Maybe," I said honestly, "when it feels right." She nodded as if she knew that was the most she deserved. Driving away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The past no longer lived behind me. It lived in its place, finally contained. Months later, I received another letter, short and unpolished. Emily, I'm learning how to live quietly, how to earn small kinds of peace. I hope you found yours. I folded it and placed it beside her first one in my drawer. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Just truth-preserved two confessions separated by years of silence. That evening, I walked to the beach again. The air was cool, the tide steady. I thought of all the versions of myself that had existed: the obedient daughter, the silent witness, the reluctant avenger, the survivor, and now the woman who no longer needed to prove anything. I took a deep breath and let the ocean wind pull through my hair. Somewhere out there, she was learning to live without an audience. And somewhere here, I was learning to live without fear. Justice had done its work. The law had spoken. But healing that was my work now. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered one last time, not to her, but to the girl I once was. You did it. You made it out. The waves carried the words away, dissolving them into something endless. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what I'd escaped. I was defined by what I'd become.